Connecticut and Massachusetts, Z&M Homes buys houses. Sell your property to the local guys.
Needs repairs, updates, maybe foreclosure or inherited? No problem. We gotcha. Google or add us on Facebook at ZANDMHomes.com.
It's Baxie's musical podcast.
$14 million albums. If selling that many records were that easy to do, everybody be doing it. But they don't. And they rarely do it by singing traditional Celtic music. But Canadian singer Loreena McKennitt has. She's not only sold 14 million albums, she's been nominated for multiple Grammy Awards. She's performed before the royal family. She's been awarded a bunch of honorary degrees and distinctions. She's performed during the opening ceremonies of the 2010 Winter Olympic Games in Vancouver. And that's not even the half of it, because I haven't even mentioned her 1991 album, The Visit, which went gold in the United States. And after all of that, she finally gets to be a guest on Baxie's musical podcast. Impressive? You bet. But here's the thing. Loreena McKennitt's musical career, while undeniably impressive, is almost as interesting as the story that got her there. This is a woman who has experienced a lifetime of heartbreaking loss, incredible success, a terrifying invasion of her personal privacy, and an 8-year-long hiatus from the public eye. And she still sold that many records. And yet, in spite of that, Loreena McKennitt is a tireless philanthropist who has raised millions of dollars for various humanitarian causes and charities. All of this while establishing herself as a giant in the folk and Celtic music world. Again, her appeal reaches far beyond that of traditional Celtic audiences. She has a profound influence in other genres too, both goth and metal alike. Loreena McKennitt is touring the United States for the first time in 8 years, including this week at the Chevalier Theater in Medford, Massachusetts on Sunday, October 14th. What you're about to hear is the fascinating story of an amazing woman of enormous strength and generosity. And so it's a real pleasure to speak to the legendary Loreena McKennitt on Baxie's musical podcast. Hey, Loreena, how are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Very, very good. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I've been doing a lot of studying up in the last couple of days to get ready for and I'm very excited about it because I was listening to The Visit over the last couple of days, and to know that it's been 31 years since that came out, and to have a record that literally sounds like it could have come out yesterday kind of shows the timelessness of that recording. It must be so strange for you to go back and think of things in 31-year intervals. But tell me about that record and what that's meant for you.
Well, it certainly was a milestone in my career. Up until that point, I had produced and distributed 3 recordings outside of the framework of a major label's distribution arm, and that was primarily focused on Canada. I did have a few distribution arrangements with folks in Spain and France and Netherlands, actually, before I signed with Warner. But The Visit was really the first one within the framework of the Warner Music Group internationally. So the fact that it connected the way it did, certainly from a career standpoint, pitched my career in life into a very different place than it had been from 85 to 91. But musically speaking, I do see it when I look back. I was clearly on a continuum of things. I had, just going back, I grew up in Manitoba and I lived in Winnipeg, and I was part of a traditional folk club that got together on a regular basis. And then I moved to Stratford, where I still live in the vicinity, Stratford, Ontario, where there's a Shakespearean festival. But in the folk club, and there were members from Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, and Brittany that oh God, my brain just went blank. I just gave him a really intense call. that really sparked. I realized the traditional music. You couldn't really be part of the traditional music or without understanding the context in which it sprang. So then I took a course of Irish history, particularly from about 1800 to contemporary times, and then as I learned more about the history of the Celts, the next big event was in 1990 or 91 when I attended an exhibition in Venice that was the most extensive exhibition ever assembled on the Celts, and came to realize that they were much more than this mad collection of anarchists from Scotland and Ireland and Wales, but they were this vast collection of tribes that fanned out across Europe and into Asia Minor in places we now refer to as Turkey and Greece. So that interest and that kind of license I was giving myself to bring in other cultural influences into the music and the arrangements, rather than just staying tight to the traditional repertoire. So that had already begun in '89, even before I had heard about the Celts going east. But by 90, I guess it would have been when I went to that exhibition, that was pretty foundational, and certainly for the next recording of the Mask and Mirror. And also in those years, when I was in Winnipeg, part of the folk club, there were some groups, Steelite Span, and particularly Alain Stavel, who's a harper from Brittany, and his band he plays more like a Celtic harp from Brittany, but his band would consist of a set of drums and a cello and a bombard, which is this reed instrument, and electric guitar, and he was doing Celtic. It was kind of like a Celtic rock music. So I also thought, wow, this gives me the even more license to do what I want.
It's fascinating to me how much work and research you put into your writing and the arranging of music. It's not like typically you'll hear of a songwriter, banging away at piano chords for a couple hours in their own home. I mean, you're traveling the world and you're finding cultures that inspire you, and that's not a very typical approach of a lot of people. Tell me about that curiosity in you, because obviously this must come from somewhere just beyond folk club. This is much more global in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel my career has compensated for my lack of formal education past high school. I did aspire to be a veterinarian, and I maintain that I have the interior disposition of a vet, but and I did go to university for 3 short months after high school, but then left because there were a variety of other musical opportunities that were coming my way. But again, I've already lost track of the question.
No, just about the amount of research and how it's informed your writing and everything.
Yeah, and that history is like this big jigsaw puzzle, and I had been infatuated by travel writing. And I felt that it wasn't really a super conscious thing. I'm going to pursue my career as an active musical travel writing, but that's what it became. Because once I went to that exhibition, I said, wow, the Celts not only here in the northwest corner of Spain or in Portugal, France, Germany, Greece, Turkey, and the original, where they felt the earliest Celts would have been around the Russian steppes or Mongolia and thereabouts. So I just felt, I love to travel. I'll just have to go to these places where they were and just soak up the atmosphere. Not that and go to some museums or archaeological sites, and all that traveling and gathering up this multiple sensory information became quite foundational for me when I went into the studio, because I wanted to go back and try to paint, musically speaking, or capture some of that multiple sensory experience and point to the geography or the time through the choice of instruments and the idiom that they were playing in. So hopefully it all kind of stitched together.
It sounds like being a vet would have been a whole lot less work. In a way, it sounds like music just ruined everything for you.
Yeah, well, boy, it's been an incredible, ride and journey that I could never have anticipated whatsoever. And I think the other aspect of it all is that I've never had a traditional manager, so I've managed my career. So that's been another, less than common aspect of the picture.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that in a little bit. What I find is so really incredible about you and about your career is the United States is not typically known as a place that makes Celtic music into gold records. It doesn't necessarily traditionally speaking, it's not the kind of place where you say, well, yeah, that could easily go gold in the States. And yet it has, and not just in the States, but like you say, in multiple different countries, not just multi-platinum in Canada, but literally all over the world in different parts of the world. Mm-hmm. Do you think that the amount of research that you've done, the care and the deliberation over your choices, is what ultimately connects people? Because to me, it's all very traditional music, and everybody has their own traditional fare, but there's something else about it that connects in a really profound way.
Well, the best way that I've been able to examine or explain, this international response, part of it is that the Celtic music in itself, on the most part, and I think even more so with the Irish, maybe some of the Scottish, I would want to pick favorites, that's quite infectious in itself, that the world over, the traditional, let's say, Irish music seems to have, and you've got the jigs and reels side, but then you've got these kind of melancholy, but many beautiful, beautiful melodies. So I've maintained that I've been trading in a genre that was kind of infectious to begin with. I think the second ingredient in my picture, because I've approached it as this multicultural event and woven together instruments and arrangements that are in less than common combinations, that there's something fresh and unusual attached to this infectious genre of music. And then I think add in a certain quality of my voice that is also attractive to some people. And perhaps that my classical training has allowed me to bring to folk, it's a sort of a version of world music, really, where we've got these traditional instruments, but we also have kit drums and electric guitars, and is that the classical training can bring a sense of intimacy and dynamics to the performance that is less in common with this genre.
And I see that too, because the audience that you have is very broad, not just in the sense that these are people that purely listen to folk or purely listen to Celtic music, but there are audience members who are metal fans, who are goth fans. The broad nature of what you do, I think, is really very, very interesting to me, because there aren't a whole lot of people that can appeal to that wide of an audience with such a different in a different genre.
Yeah, we've seen it in the communications that come to us over the decades now. In terms of what people do as professions, everything from truck drivers. We've had different people of different faiths. We've had educators who've used some of the poems I've set to music as an entry point for their students to get into poetry. We've a fair bit of military people have used it in therapeutic kind of ways. So yes, and people who have, but will often have. There'll often be, what is the term? There'll be their musical taste will be quite liberal. They'll be quite, and often not locked into one thing. But like in Germany, there certainly are some heavy metal people that come, and they're all in their black jackets and stuff.
Your list of achievements is just an astounding list of things that you've been able to do. I mean, Grammy Award nominations, a couple of Juno Awards. You sang at the Olympics, Carnegie Hall. You sang in front of the Queen, and again, you're from a small farm in Manitoba. I mean, do you ever just think to yourself, "Oh my God, I'm singing before the damn Queen"? Who's responsible for this?
Yes. No, it's quite sobering and humbling all at the same time. I mean, I think because I've chosen to manage my own career, my feet have never really left the ground from the standpoint of understanding how much just hard work is involved in doing things. But the fact that there can be this incredible payoff of connecting with so many people, I mean, really, that's one of the big prizes of life, isn't it? Is doing things that have meaning for other people.
You've mentioned the fact that you're self-produced, self-managed, and self-sufficient to the point where you own your own record company. I mean, there's so many artists out there who have become and have been so dependent and subordinated by not being in control, both creatively or on the business side of their career. Considering how the music industry has changed over the last decade, or even more than that, it sounds like that really is the only real pathway to having any real control and to being successful in music anymore, is to really take control of all of it, not just the creative side of it.
Yeah, I mean, and I often say to people, I like to say that I knew what I was doing, but I didn't. It was more by default. I knew what I didn't want. I knew what didn't work for me. And because I had invested 5 years of developing my career from 85 to 1990, I was able to bring to the record company a picture that was already put together. I could finance my own recordings. I didn't have to borrow from them to do them. I was already putting myself on tour. I had learned about touring finances and logistics and contracts and all the bits and pieces. Though I remember when this project came to Warner Brothers Records in Los Angeles, and I mean they always seemed kind of amused in a particular way that this artist was running their own affairs, but at the same time kind of nervous that something might blow up at any time. Right. It felt like there were children wandering around without their parents, and for a while there they would, each time I go down there, they'd set me up with meetings with prospective managers and trying to see if something would click. It was like a blind dating kind of thing. I remember the last manager I went to see, and by this time I was selling in Canada and internationally, but I really wanted assistance in the United States in terms of touring and marketing.
Sure.
And I said to the manager, or this prospective manager, I wanted to keep certain parts of the picture for myself, but I was looking to hire some. He sat back and he says, if you think I'm going to work for some artist, you've got another thing coming. And I said, well, that's all I need to know. Yeah. I'm sure your other artists would be interested in hearing that. Now, I told Warner Brothers, I'm just unmanageable, so let's accept this. And this is
But what a self-sufficient, self-fulfilling prophecy that is. They have to do things their way when, in fact, to confront someone who is willing to take on all of that extra work and do it in a way that suits them. It just shows how short-sighted the entire recording industry.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't stupid, though, either, because they learned how I had done this, had achieved my success in Canada, particularly through public broadcasting, through university radio, through a real grassroots type of thing. And they didn't miss a beat, and they set up all this kind of program of me going on these promotional trips in the States. But I will say this, in that era of time, it was possible to do what I did and come out to where I've come to. It would not be possible now. The framework of the business is so harsh for the artists, and particularly the side of the commodification of the music versus the touring side. That it just couldn't. My career could not have started the way it did and gone to the way it did if I had started now.
I've read a couple of interviews that you've done, and one of the things that I thought was kind of telling is your opinion about fame. Obviously, you've had some tremendous successes in your career, but you never went out with the idea of becoming famous. It was just part of it was like the occupational reality of
It's the byproduct. And sometimes a handicap,
Yeah. I mean, you want to find an audience, you want to be heard, but at the same time, it does come with a cost, not just, to you,
Absolutely.
especially to you personally, and whether it's about privacy or any of the other things that
Yeah.
that you have been actively involved in.
Yeah. No, there definitely is a price. And I think this goes back to me wanting to be a veterinarian and never aspiring to be a singer and all that came with that. But rather, I love music. And I fell madly in love with the Celtic music. And it kind of led me by the nose. But fame had nothing to do with it. I remember at the juncture of the visit that I'd been, ferreting away at a fairly grassroots level in Canada predominantly, and, selling about 30,000 copies of my 1989 recording and putting us on tour. But when I signed with the Warner Group, and I remember doing this showcase in Toronto, and it was the old-fashioned ones where the media and the radio and the retail and folks were invited to come, and was kind of a schmooze fest. But I played about 4 or 5 pieces from the visit, and I realized it was like the lightning bolt, that my life was about to change. And I remember the person from Warner Canada, who's actually continues to be a really good friend of mine. He's no longer with Warner's. But he was driving me back to the hotel, and I just wept in the car. It was kind of I realized I was crossing over a threshold, and I'd never be able to go back. And, but I managed it fairly well, again, by being my own. And that probably is one of the reasons I have retained control, not just from a business standpoint, but being, aware of some of the perils that can come with fame. And so I'm connected to this community in Stratford, where I came in 1981, and my career didn't take off for a decade later. So I wander around the street, and people can't make anything of it. I go shopping, I go to the grocery store, go to the bank, and it's a perfect normal existence. It's only when I leave here and go on tour that I'm reminded, oh, right, there's this side. And although I'm grateful that my music is connected with so many people, I don't thrive in the notoriety or the fame. I relish strong relationships with people.
Mm-hmm. It has to be somewhat challenging. I mean, it's great that you've rooted yourself in a community with friends and feel a part of a community that doesn't necessarily see you as someone who sold 14 million records, but maybe the lady down the street who I got to buy, borrow a cup of sugar from, or whatever it may be. But throughout your life, I mean, you've had a couple of situations where you've dealt with some very tragic loss in your life within your family, and I'm not going to ask you to rehash that that kind of loss. But when you are a public figure and you go through that and you have a level of fame, it does complicate how you manage through things like grief and loss.
Oh, yeah.
And all kinds of kinds of things. How do you see yourself managing through those moments when things can somehow become public situations?
Yeah, I mean, there's only really been 2 of those events. One was that loss of my fiance in '98, and then a handful of years later was this landmark privacy case in the UK, of which a former friend who was very, very privy to the whole period of that loss and grief and everything, we had a falling out, and she decided she was going to write a book. I mean, how does one handle it? Well, with the tragedy of '98, most people in this community didn't know the degree of the relationship that I had with Ron, and it was only a fair while later. At that time, I was actually protecting family. I would be from media who may be coming into the picture too soon. The privacy case was a whole other piece, because this had been a premeditated thing that I just learned about, and this goes back to that fame type of thing, and the fact that privacy is a human right for a very, very good reason. And people, no matter what whether they're artists or whether they're politicians, sports figures, you need a healthy sphere of privacy in order to be a healthy, normal kind of person. And so that was an incredible journey. I mean, we won, or I won that right up to the House of Lords when they went to appeal the appeal. The House of Lords said, "Oh no, I think those judges before us have done a fine job." But you have to be able to stand up for what you believe and you think are strong and important principles.
I think what's really important about this, we're not just talking about the privacy of someone who happens to be famous or is a recording artist, but everybody's right to privacy should be viciously protected. Mm-hmm. Because I think, I know, here in the States, a lot of people just ignore the fact that our phones may be tracking our conversations. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like we are, constantly being tracked by cameras or whatever it may be. And we take it for granted of what it's actually doing to compromise our privacy. It's like we're willing to forego a level of privacy to at least have fun playing Candy Crush on our phones. I mean,
yeah, for sure. The trade-off is it's mortifying. I mean, you probably it really does sound like you spent a fair bit of time, looking at what I've been interested or passionate about or professionally and outside of that. But I have very, very strong feelings about the negative and perhaps unintended consequences of technology. And this is just one strand of it to do with privacy, in that we seem to not realize that we've exchanged our national security, maybe our caliber of democracy, and our privacy for efficiency, convenience, and entertainment. And I think that the way that the tech companies have been able to infiltrate and affect society writ large over the past couple of decades is, into my mind, not unlike the way fossil fuels did, around the turn of the Industrial Revolution. And so, privacy is just one strand of that, and that's worth a whole other call.
Yeah, well, I know. But during these situations that we're talking about here, the death of your fiance and then the lawsuit, that's a block of 8 years that you had to focus on those things and step back from music. What was it that said, okay, it's now time to go back. It's now time to kind of move forward?
Well, to be honest, I didn't. What appears on the outside that I stepped back, and indeed I did. I mean, that event of '98 happened in July, but in 2000. I found myself purchasing the building that I'm talking to you from, and it's a 1929 schoolhouse that I thought I was only going to do it temporarily. It was a beautiful heritage school that was made redundant and was put up for auction on very short notice, right in the middle of Stratford. And I bought it trying to delay the demolition so that the community had a chance to decide what they wanted this property to be, because the school board was not allowing for that. In the end, as I said, 23 years later, I still have the property. From 2000 to 2001 and 2, that was was one big project. Another big project was actually we set up a water safety fund as a result of that 98 event. And I devoted the recording that I'd made in the spring of '98 to raise between $3 and $4 million for this water safety fund. So setting that up, getting its charitable status, getting an advisory group, dealing with applications and all that was. And then I think I started going out on the road about 2003 or 4. I went to Mongolia, passed through Russia, and on my slow journey to the ancient muse. And it was just within the year of releasing an ancient muse that I learned that this book was coming out. And it seemed that she was writing it to be timed to be released, to be able to ride on the coattails of the ancient muse. So that privacy case didn't come in till I had already pretty much finished an ancient muse. and then we were touring while I was also. I mean, I lived in London, England, for several months, off and on for a couple of years,
Right.
just dealing with that. But I have to say I'm extremely proud of that, because it became a very important brick in the road for privacy protection, which I've now seen has that case, McKennitt versus Ash, has been a very significant case in UK privacy law. So, it all comes at you through the course of your life here.
Yeah. Well, Loreena, vets don't have these kinds of problems.
It's amazing, until I get into interviews like this, it's not that I forget about all these events, but they are enough behind me. And right now, we're all, in addition to this tour we have coming up, we've got another one in Europe in the spring and probably another one in Europe in the summer. But we're also heavily involved in civic things. We've got Truth and Reconciliation Week going on here at the Family Centre. And then I'm also, that you probably would have stumbled on the fact that I'm the Honorary Colonel for the Royal Canadian Air Force.
Yes, I did see that.
So, and somewhere in there, the music happens. It's kind of like there are seasons for it or something.
I know that, the tour is going on. The U.S. tour is going on through the month of October. And like you said, you're back to Canada, then to Europe until the beginning of April. I mean, it seems like a very intense couple of months for you with touring. And this is the first time you've been to the U.S. in 8 years. So this is, that's amazing.
Yeah, we have lots of friends there in the United States, and I'm really, really looking forward to them. I'm afraid in this tour, because of the peril of COVID still being in the mix, I'm not going to be able to meet and greet people in the same way as I have in the past. And for me, that's actually, it's great performing and completing that circle of connection with the audience, but it's also wonderful being able to meet folks. So I'm going to feel very sad about that, but we're really looking forward to reconnecting with our friends.
Well, we're going to be coming to the Boston area on Saturday, October 14th, the Chevalier Theater in Medford. Loreena, it's a real pleasure to talk to you. Best of luck with the tour, and thanks for spending the time today.
Oh, it's been a great chance to speak with you. Great questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Loreena McKennitt is on tour right now in the U.S., and like I said, that includes October 14th in Medford, Mass. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like it, rate it, share it with all your friends. Check out Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok for all the regular updates, and feel free to email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to know what you think. Thanks to Z&M Home Buyers for their support, and thanks to you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.